A quiet murmur filled the hospital halls that evening, but something felt wrong, almost disturbingly out of place. An aging war veteran named Samuel, who had survived deserts, jungles, and frontline chaos, now lay in a hospital bed, fighting pain with nothing but willpower. The medication that once eased his suffering had mysteriously stopped reaching him. He whispered of burning nerves and sleepless nights, yet every complaint was brushed aside by the cold smile of one particular nurse who always seemed hostile, as if his pain amused her. Those who noticed stayed silent, fearing consequences, unaware that this silence would soon echo louder than any battlefield explosion. Rumors slipped through whispers like smoke, medication disappearing, patients left suffering, and a suspicious pattern that always pointed back to the same nurse. Samuel's condition worsened, and his eyes dulled like a soldier losing ground without ammunition. He tried to alert others, but his voice was drowned beneath bureaucracy, budgets, and a relentless rush of apathetic routines. The nurse, confident in her untouchable position, continued her cruel game, pocketing pills meant for those who had given everything to protect their homeland. It was not just theft. It was betrayal against those who had already sacrificed blood in years. But the world outside those sanitized walls is smaller than it seems. One late night, a young receptionist overheard Samuel's trembling confession and finally reached out beyond hospital rules. She contacted a group whose loyalty was thicker than diesel fumes and chrome. 40 hardened bikers who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Samuel on foreign soil. They rode under the same thunderous insignia, bound by honor and an unwavering oath. Never abandon a brother, especially one who cannot fight. When the call reached them, their engines roared alive like war drums waking an ancient army. As hospital staff clocked in, the ground began to hum. Patients peeked through curtains, windows rattled, and the nurses' smirk twisted into panic as the first motorcycle headlights flooded the entrance. One by one, engines growled to a halt until 40 leather-clad riders formed a wall of steel and justice at the hospital doorstep. Their boots echoed down the hall, step after deliberate step, shot through with enough intensity to make doctors freeze mid-sentence. They walked not with anger, but with purpose, because pain inflicted on a veteran was pain inflicted on all of them. Every heartbeat in that building held its breath as they approached Samuel's room. His eyes widened with disbelief, but behind those tears was relief. Brotherhood had come. In that moment, the nurse's arrogance collapsed. The bikers weren't here to cause chaos. They were here to reveal truth, defend loyalty, and remind everyone watching that honor does not retire. And as their presence filled the hospital with thunderous silence, one question hung over every trembling soul. What happens when justice rides in on two wheels, refusing to leave until the forgotten are heard? The tension inside the hospital tightened like a vice. Nurses scrambled to appear busy, doctors avoided eye contact, and quiet gossip spread like wildfire. At the center of it all, Samuel sat propped in his bed, unsure if he was dreaming. His brothers, those he thought he would never see again, now stood surrounding him with silent strength. One biker placed a calloused hand on Samuel's shoulder, assuring him that he was no longer alone. That small gesture rekindled a flame in the veteran's weary eyes, reminding him of the camaraderie that once kept him alive on distant battlefields. The nurse responsible for his suffering tried to disappear into the maze of corridors, her heart pounding with each step. But the bikers were disciplined, sharp, and trained to track fear. They divided themselves with military precision, quietly forming checkpoints at every exit. Their presence demanded attention, and staff who had once turned a blind eye now watched in breathless awe. The walls that protected corruption finally cracked beneath the weight of loyalty. Even patients felt an electric charge, murmuring prayers that justice would at last find its rightful path. One biker, known for his calm demeanor, approached the head nurse and offered a chance to tell the truth. His voice was low, steady, but carried decades of hidden storms. The head nurse stuttered and deflected, claiming ignorance. Yet her trembling hands betrayed her. Slowly, a few honest nurses stepped forward, admitting they had seen suspicious patterns but were too afraid to speak. Their confessions acted like dominoes, tipping doubt into certainty, painting a clear picture of a system that had ignored suffering for far too long. In Samuel's room, the mood shifted from despair to empowerment. He recounted his struggles with a quivering voice, but as he spoke, strength returned, like a soldier regaining control of a battlefield. Each biker listened without interruption, their stoic expressions masking storms of anger and heartbreak. They had seen brothers fall in war, but to watch one be harmed at home by those sworn to heal, that wound cut deeper than any battlefield injury. Respect for veterans was not just tradition, it was sacred. As the truth unfolded, patients from neighboring rooms leaned forward with curiosity. Some whispered memories of similar mistreatment, creating a chain of testimonies that stretched through the ward. The hospital's atmosphere transformed into a courtroom of conscience. Every word spoken lit a spark of courage, and the flames of justice burned brighter. The bikers were not vigilantes. They were guardians, reminding everyone that silence can be the cruelest weapon, but unity can be louder than thunder. Security eventually arrived, attempting to escort the bikers out, but hesitation clouded their authority. These were not reckless strangers. They were decorated veterans with medals, scars, and stories etched into their skin. One security guard, recognizing a familiar insignia, lowered his stance and saluted. It was a quiet salute, but it echoed louder than any command. The rest of the security team followed suit, acknowledging a brotherhood forged in sacrifice. With that heartfelt gesture, the bikers earned not only space, but respect. Meanwhile, the nurse in question cowered in a supply closet, gripping stolen medication bottles like trophies. Fear twisted her features, yet there was no remorse, only desperation. Her phone buzzed with messages from others involved in the scheme, urging her to stay quiet, to not fold under pressure. But the walls were closing in. The footsteps outside reminded her that justice could not be outrun forever. What she once believed were unbreakable rules had become fragile lies. The bikers divided once more, searching for witnesses. In a quiet corner of the pediatric wing, a young volunteer confessed she had seen the nurse pocketing pills, but her supervisor dismissed her claims. Tears stained her cheeks as she spoke. Ashamed, she allowed fear to silence her. A biker gently lifted her chin and told her she did the right thing now. That encouragement became a turning point, empowering her to lead them to storage rooms where more evidence waited to be discovered. Back in Samuel's room, nurses who once ignored him now offered apologies and fresh blankets. They spoke gently, ashamed of their earlier indifference. Samuel nodded, gracious even in pain, because forgiveness was part of what made him honorable. But the bikers watched with sharp eyes, reminding everyone present that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Justice does not require violence. It demands accountability. Slowly, floor by floor, the truth spread like dawn breaking through a dark horizon. The hospital staff, who had once been numb to suffering, now felt the weight of responsibility settle on their shoulders. People who walked past Samuel's bed without a glance now paused, offering water, comfort, or simple words of gratitude. The power dynamic shifted. No longer was he just another patient. He was a symbol, and symbols have a way of waking entire worlds from their slumber. As whispers morphed into full confessions, the hospital's administration attempted to intervene. A polished supervisor with an expensive suit approached the bikers, offering reassurances wrapped in corporate language. He insisted everything was a misunderstanding, promising to review protocols and conduct internal investigations. But the bikers recognized manipulation when they saw it. They had witnessed too many leaders hide behind paperwork and delay accountability until truth suffocated. Their narrowed eyes and folded arms told the supervisor plainly, this time, excuses would not bury the pain. The supervisor's voice faltered as he noticed patients gathering behind him, each listening with sharpened attention. Elderly veterans adjusted their oxygen masks to speak, telling stories of missing doses, prolonged suffering, and countless complaints dismissed without explanation. Their testimonies stacked together like bricks, constructing a wall of irrefutable truth. The bikers stood silently behind them, acting as a shield, giving the powerless a platform to finally be heard. Even the most stubborn skeptic began questioning if the nurse was only part of something much larger. Meanwhile, The corrupt nurse remained hidden, trapped in her shrinking sanctuary. With trembling hands, she rifled through pockets, searching for an escape plan that no longer existed. In her desperation, she left behind a trail, receipts, messages, empty blister packs, all damning evidence of a system rotting from the inside. When two bikers tracked her down, they did not raise their voices or hands. Instead, they simply asked why. That single word, calm and heavy, cracked her composure more than any threat could. She stammered excuses, but guilt wrapped around her throat like chains. As the bikers escorted her back through the hallway, every patient stared, some in sadness, others in disappointment, and a few with tears streaming silently down their cheeks. Betrayal always hurts deeper when trust is involved. The nurse's shoulders shook under the weight of their gaze. She had treated suffering like currency, and now she faced the cost. The bikers remained firm but composed, refusing to show cruelty, because true justice never descends to the darkness it confronts. Back in the ward, the atmosphere continued shifting. Nurses who had once rushed past Samuel's bed now slowed to check on him. One offered to personally oversee his medication schedule moving forward. Another adjusted his blankets carefully, eyes filled with regret. The transformation was not instant, but it was undeniable. Pain had forced awareness, and awareness was awakening empathy. Samuel, weak but hopeful, offered a thin smile. It was a smile that said change had finally begun, and he would witness it firsthand. Word of the incident spread beyond the hospital. Family members, local veterans, and community leaders arrived, filling waiting rooms with anxious faces. They approached the bikers one by one, expressing gratitude. Some shared stories of relatives mistreated in similar ways, while others asked how they could help. A quiet momentum built, fueled by outrage but guided by compassion. It became clear this was not just Samuel's battle. It was a ripple touching countless lives. The bikers took mental notes, documenting every account to ensure no voice faded into silence. Hospital cameras turned toward the growing crowd, capturing scenes of solidarity rarely witnessed in ordinary life. Reporters soon arrived, drawn by the thunder of leather boots and chrome. Microphones were extended, but the bikers refused to speak for themselves. Instead, they redirected attention to the patients, the true victims. Elderly men with trembling hands, women fighting illness alone, and veterans who carried invisible scars stepped into the spotlight. Their voices quivered, but their words hit like hammers striking stone. The hospital administrator, realizing public pressure had grown impossible to ignore, called for an emergency meeting. Behind closed doors, excuses collided with evidence. Financial motives surfaced, stolen medication resold on the streets, budget cuts disguised as negligence, bonuses earned by reducing treatment costs. Every revelation darkened the room further. When the doors finally swung open, officials wore expressions of defeat. Their promises no longer sounded hollow. They sounded fearful. Meanwhile, Samuel received his long-delayed medication. With each dose, relief returned like warmth after a long winter. He sat up straighter, strength returning to limbs once weakened by pain. The bikers cheered softly, their joy controlled but sincere. They knew battles were not always fought with bullets. Sometimes, progress came in the form of a pill, finally placed into the right hands. It was victory, not just for Samuel, but for every forgotten voice lingering in hospital corners. As night fell, hospital lights reflected in chrome helmets. Some bikers lingered beside patients, listening to forgotten stories of love, war, and family. Others helped visitors find their loved ones, guiding them through sterile hallways with surprising gentleness. For a moment, the hospital transformed from a cold institution into a sanctuary of compassion. The weight of suffering did not vanish, but it felt lighter, carried on shoulders willing to help bear it. In that fragile calm, hope flickered brighter than it had in years. The following morning, the hospital awoke to an unfamiliar sight. Officers of the law walking side by side with the same bikers who arrived the day before. Overnight, evidence had been compiled, statements gathered, and official reports submitted. The nurse responsible was handcuffed quietly, her eyes darting around for any trace of support that no longer existed. Her colleagues, once complicit by silence, refused to meet her gaze. The officers escorted her out through the main lobby, allowing patients and staff to witness the consequences of her choices. Justice did not roar. It whispered, steady and undeniable. As she was led away, a hush settled over the room. The bikers did not cheer nor smirk. Instead, they stood with arms crossed, heads lowered, not in triumph, but in reflection. They knew the damage she caused was not simply physical. It was emotional, and wounds like those take time to heal. Their silence conveyed a lesson louder than celebration ever could. Power misused always collapses under the weight of truth. Patients who had endured months of pain exhaled collectively, as if releasing poison from their lungs. One doctor, respected and kind-hearted, stepped forward to address the crowd. He acknowledged the failings of the hospital, admitting that negligence had been allowed to flourish. His voice shook as he spoke about trust, responsibility, and the sacred duty of caregivers. Tears pooled in his eyes, because he understood healing must begin with honesty. He promised sweeping reforms, increased oversight, and zero tolerance for misconduct. For the first time in years, his words felt sincere, and people listened not with suspicion, but with hope. Meanwhile, Samuel watched from his bed, sitting straighter than before. Strength returned gradually, flowing back into his voice and posture. A young nurse approached him, offering water with trembling hands. She apologized for being afraid to speak earlier, admitting she never realized her silence could deepen suffering. Samuel placed his hand over hers gently, telling her that courage is not measured by when one stays silent, but by the moment one finally speaks. That simple exchange softened hardened hearts throughout the ward. Outside, community members continued to gather. They brought homemade food, blankets, and handwritten letters thanking veterans for their service. Some children approached the bikers hesitantly, asking about their badges and patches. The riders knelt down to their level, explaining each symbol represented loyalty, honor, and sacrifice. As the children listened, stars reflected in their eyes, stars born from admiration rather than fear. For a brief moment, the world felt beautifully balanced, as if kindness had regained its rightful place. Later that afternoon, a press conference formed outside the hospital entrance. Cameras glimmered beneath the sun, and reporters jostled for position. The bikers maintained formation behind Samuel, who stood supported by two brothers on either side. Although exhausted, he insisted on speaking. He wanted the world to know the truth not through anger, but through perspective. When the microphones hovered in front of him, silence fell over the crowd like snowfall. Samuel began by recounting his journey as a soldier, how he once bled for strangers, trusting his nation would support him in return. His voice wavered when he spoke about the loneliness he felt in the hospital, ignored and dismissed. But when he described seeing the bikers walk through those doors, warmth filled his tone. He reminded everyone listening that loyalty is not just a word, it is an oath carried across decades. His story painted not a picture of victimhood, but of resilience. The reporters, expecting outrage, instead captured something far more powerful: gratitude. Samuel thanked the honest nurses, security guards, and volunteers who eventually found courage. He encouraged people to speak up when something feels wrong. His words transformed from personal testimony into universal truth, an anthem for anyone who has ever felt unseen. The audience's eyes glistened, and even the bikers shifted subtly, touched by their brother's courage. When Samuel finished, applause erupted. Not polite applause, but raw, overflowing appreciation. The bikers placed their hands on his shoulders proudly, forming a protective wall around him. Cameras captured the moment, immortalizing the sight of unity prevailing over corruption. The news would travel faster than any motorcycle engine, carrying a message strong enough to echo across countless cities. When communities stand together, darkness cannot hide. As the press conference ended, local officials approached the bikers privately. They requested input on new regulations for hospital oversight, recognizing that systemic healing requires voices from outside polished offices. The bikers agreed, offering to assist in any initiative aimed at protecting vulnerable patients. Their willingness to collaborate surprised many. These were not rebels. They were guardians of dignity. And through their help, the seeds of lasting change were sown, promising a future where no veteran would ever suffer unseen again. With reforms underway and accountability at last in motion, the hospital's atmosphere transformed over the next several days. Staff who once hurried through their shifts now moved with intent, their eyes sharper to detail, their compassion rekindled. New training sessions rolled out, designed to teach nurses and doctors how to spot signs of neglect, theft, and emotional distress. The very hallways that once echoed with quiet indifference were now filled with purpose. Samuel noticed the difference most. Every glance held genuine care instead of cold routine. The bikers, though satisfied, did not vanish immediately. They lingered like watchtowers of leather and steel, ensuring promises were not broken the moment backs turned. Their presence eased patient anxiety, especially among older veterans who had seen too much betrayal in their lives. Some bikers even spent nights in waiting rooms, sharing stories with lonely elders and listening to the fears they never dared speak to family. In those quiet midnight hours, bonds formed stronger than blood. Sometimes healing begins with nothing more than being heard. Meanwhile, the nurse who led the scheme faced interrogation. Each question peeled back layers of deception, revealing a network of others who benefited from her theft. Names surfaced. Accounts were traced. What was once considered an isolated act of cruelty grew into a scandal. The hospital administration was forced to act decisively, terminating several employees who enabled the wrongdoing. For years, patients whispered suspicions, but now their voices broke through walls. Justice does not always strike swiftly. Sometimes it arrives slow, but thorough. Samuel's condition improved dramatically. With proper medication administered on schedule, his body responded like dry soil meeting rain. He regained appetite, color returned to his cheeks, and a constant ache that once chained him gradually loosened. Doctors watched in awe, realizing how much unnecessary suffering had been endured simply because of greed. One physician, guilt heavy in his eyes, admitted he should have listened sooner. Samuel responded with grace, telling him healing is not just for the body, but for the conscience as well. One evening, while watching the sunset from his bed, Samuel spoke softly to a biker sitting beside him. He wondered aloud why those who suffer silently often become invisible. The biker replied with wisdom earned from decades on the road. The world grows noisy, but pain whispers. It takes attentive hearts to hear it. That answer resonated deep within Samuel's mind. He realized that despite everything, humanity still held flickers of light, sometimes hidden beneath fear, but never extinguished. And that night, he slept peacefully for the first time in months. Outside the hospital, life buzzed with renewed energy. Dozens of community members formed support groups for vulnerable patients, offering rides, meals, and companionship. Local businesses donated supplies, while volunteers created a hotline for reporting suspicious activity within medical facilities. The scandal had ignited something rare: collective empathy. People who once rushed past suffering suddenly slowed down. They saw, they listened, they cared. Samuel watched these efforts unfold like blooming flowers, knowing that his pain had planted seeds of change. The bikers became unexpected heroes. News articles painted them as protectors, guardians of the forgotten, symbols of brotherhood beyond bloodlines. Children who once feared leather jackets now waved excitedly when seeing motorcycles pass. Parents explained that heroes do not always wear capes. Sometimes they wear helmets. The bikers accepted the attention humbly, always redirecting praise toward the patients whose courage broke the silence. They insisted they were not saviors, only messengers carrying a reminder: honor matters. Inside the hospital, Samuel underwent his final evaluation. Doctors smiled as they delivered good news. His progress exceeded expectations, and he would be discharged soon. The moment struck him deeply. He thought of the cold nights he spent awake, trembling in pain, wondering if anyone remembered the soldiers who returned home carrying scars of invisible battles. Now, he felt seen again. His gratitude overflowed quietly, settling into every heartbeat like a warm ember. Before leaving, Samuel visited the pediatric wing. Children there adored him, calling him Grandpa Sam. He told them stories, not of war, but of courage, kindness, and the importance of standing up for others. Their laughter filled the halls, echoing life back into walls once heavy with sorrow. One girl handed him a crayon drawing of him and the bikers standing like superheroes. Samuel tucked it into his pocket, knowing he would cherish it forever. Hope is easiest to see through a child's eyes. On the day of his discharge, the parking lot was lined with motorcycles, chrome gleaming beneath sunlight like polished armor. 40 engines rumbled in unison as Samuel stepped outside in a wheelchair, pushed by a young nurse, her smile bright with admiration. The bikers saluted him, their hands resting proudly over their hearts. Samuel's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that loyalty never truly fades. It simply waits for the moment it's needed most. As Samuel approached the motorcycles, the crowd parted respectfully. One of the senior bikers stepped forward, offering Samuel a leather vest adorned with patches of honor and remembrance. Each stitch told a story, each symbol represented a bond, and at the center sat a bold emblem, a winged shield surrounded by flames, signifying protection and resilience. Samuel's hands trembled as he accepted it. The vest was not merely clothing. It was membership, acknowledgement, and permission to stand proudly among brothers once more. The bikers helped him onto a custom-built sidecar, padded for comfort, painted in deep military green. Children in the crowd cheered, waving small flags. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Samuel's smile returned in full, unrestrained, genuine, alive. The engines roared louder, blending into a unified thunder that shook the pavement. It was not noise. It was ceremony, a declaration that a warrior was being escorted home not in silence, but in triumph. Before they departed, Samuel turned to the hospital entrance. The staff stood there watching, some with relief, others with tears tracing soft lines down tired faces. The doctor who once ignored his complaints bowed his head respectfully, silently promising to do better. The young volunteer who had spoken up waved proudly, courage now glowing where fear once hid. Samuel lifted his hand in farewell, offering a final, forgiving gesture that carried more weight than any speech. The ride across town became a procession. Vehicles pulled over, pedestrians stopped, and some people placed hands over their hearts as the convoy passed. The wind brushed against Samuel's face, carrying scents of freedom, fresh asphalt, blooming trees, and distant street food. For the first time in months, he felt in control. His laughter mixed with the engine's growl, and his brothers smiled behind mirrored visors. No longer a victim, he was a survivor seated at the front of destiny's chariot. They arrived at Samuel's modest home. Neighbors gathered there, holding banners and homemade signs welcoming him back. He was helped gently from the sidecar, feeling the warmth of dozens of voices merging into one chorus of celebration. Inside his home, familiar pictures lined the walls. Moments frozen in time, battles fought, friends lost, victories earned. This homecoming, however, was different. It carried closure. It carried healing. Samuel crossed the threshold slowly, letting peace settle over him like a blanket. In the days that followed, Samuel's living room transformed into a hub of connection. The bikers visited in rotating pairs, checking on him, cooking for him, fixing things around his home. Their presence became the rhythm of his recovery, steady, reassuring, and dependable. When his pain flared, they stood watch silently until it passed. When loneliness crept near, they filled the room with stories, laughter, and the warmth of shared memories. Brotherhood, he realized, was not measured in distance or time. It was measured in presence. Word spread of Samuel's healing journey, inspiring other veterans to step forward and speak about mistreatment they had endured. Hospitals across the state reviewed their protocols, fearing similar scandals. Awareness campaigns blossomed on social media, urging caregivers to train their hearts before their hands. Samuel watched the movement grow, humbled that his suffering sparked something larger than himself. Sometimes, purpose hides behind pain, waiting for courage to pull the curtain aside. One evening, while sitting on his porch under a sky dressed in stars, Samuel reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the nurse, how greed had hardened her heart. But instead of bitterness, he felt pity. Life can bend people if they let desperation take the helm. He chose not to carry hatred, for that would only anchor him to past wounds. Instead, he breathed forgiveness into the night, releasing the weight that once crushed his spirit. As months passed, Samuel regained full strength. He began attending biker gatherings, wearing his vest with quiet pride. Younger veterans approached him seeking guidance, comforted by his wisdom. The roar of engines no longer reminded him of war. It reminded him of unity. The club's motto, etched into a patch on his vest, echoed in his mind: "Stand for those who cannot stand alone." He now lived that motto daily, offering his voice to those still searching for theirs. And so, in the grand circle of life, the story of stolen medication became something far bigger. It became a testament that justice is not found in revenge, but in accountability. It proved that brotherhood does not fade. It waits patiently behind silence. And most importantly, it taught everyone who heard it that when compassion rides on two wheels, nothing, not fear, not corruption, not even pain, can stop its arrival. The story of Samuel's quiet suffering and unexpected rescue traveled farther than anyone imagined. It revealed a painful truth hidden behind sterile walls. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not left by war, but by neglect. Yet, through the thunder of 40 engines and the unwavering loyalty of true brothers, a spark of humanity reignited. What began as one man's lonely battle became a movement, opening eyes, stirring hearts, and reminding society that compassion is a responsibility, not a choice. In the end, this was never about revenge. It was about restoring dignity where it had been stolen. The bikers proved that justice does not always wear a badge, and heroes do not always walk hallways quietly. Sometimes, they roar in with leather, steel, and an oath forged in fire. They taught the world that silence is dangerous, and that indifference can injure just as deeply as intentional cruelty. By standing beside Samuel when no one else would, they reignited a truth many forgot. Loyalty is the greatest medicine a wounded soul can receive. Their presence brought accountability, forced change, and showed that courage multiplies when shared. Samuel's recovery taught another lesson, a lesson that lingers long after the engines fade into the horizon. Pain may whisper, but perseverance speaks loudly. Even in moments of darkness, a single act of bravery can reveal dozens of hidden allies. His strength inspired policies, empowered voices, and transformed strangers into guardians. Those who once turned their backs now walk forward with open eyes, seeking to protect rather than overlook. His journey proves that healing is not just physical, it is collective, emotional, and profoundly human. And if there is one final truth to carry beyond this moment, it is this: honor must be protected. Whenever a veteran is forgotten, whenever fear silences truth, injustice spreads quietly like smoke. But when communities unite, when courage is contagious, and when compassion stands tall, corruption crumbles. Remember that real heroes may not save the world at once, but they save someone's world, and sometimes that is enough to change everything. Let Samuel's story be a reminder that kindness is louder than pain, and loyalty is stronger than fear. If this story moved you, consider joining this community by subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your voice helps more stories like this reach the eyes of those who need them most. Together, we can keep these lessons alive, ignite conversations that matter, and build a place where no one stands alone.